So this is what we got going on today. We got a pool house countertop, half inside, half exterior. We got a little wind, shouldn't rain. If it does, we got a cover on the counter at least. Got it all prepped. He primed it. Had to do a couple things when we got here. Edges weren't rounded, they were square. So we never want to coat over square edges. So had him round those edges a little bit with sandpaper. Rounded the bottom edge as well on these faces. Whenever you're doing an undermount sink, these faces have to look completely smooth, flat, no imperfections like your front edges do. So it had some imperfections in it. We just took some what is that, spackle, right? Some fast spackle stuff that dries quick, kind of in a bind. I already mixed the resin up, and so we had to use that. Fix the seams, so that's fine. But again, if you're doing undermount sinks, make sure those faces for the undermount sink have zero imperfections, no holes, no like jagged cuts. They all need to be filled, smooth, everything nice and flush and even, because again, the resin's not going to be as thick on those faces. So had to address that. And then what I had him do, I'll come out front, prime underneath. He did like 3 coats under here, so that'll help seal the wood if it ever gets wet. Obviously having the cover on here, you know, is going to help, but that's the biggest thing. Obviously when wood gets wet, it gets affected. So we're doing black with white effects and silver effects. Gonna look really, really cool with the colors they got in this house. And he also did our hardwood kit on the floor. Looks really, really cool. And then obviously the black counters are gonna just make this pool house pop. So that's what we did. I mixed it up, we got it batched out. We're pretty much ready to start pouring. And so you can always map out a design so you have lines to follow. Maybe you want a specific pattern. You can draw, or you can etch the primer with just a paint stick. Right, if I just do this, now I have a pattern to follow. So we'll probably map out a design so when we're pouring, we know exactly where the veins are going to be. But yeah, biggest thing is make sure your faces are, you know, no imperfections on your faces. Make sure they're extremely clean before you prime, because we are taping to create that dam, that barrier to let the resin set up and get thick. Plastic obviously on the floors, the counters. But yeah, it should be a cool pour. We did the same exact look on the tea house video we launched a while back. Turned out awesome. So we're kind of doing the same exact thing. We added some effects to the buckets before we added epoxy. Added some epoxy, added some more effects, added more epoxy, and then depending on how much color we want on the counter, we'll add some effects to the top to get more dominant white or the silver. That's the next steps here. We just wind up dumping a lot of the black. We didn't get a lot of color from the containers, so we just dumped a bunch of it out and then started adding the effects to like 3 or 4 containers and then doing the vein pattern. So looks really cool. We got the white color, decent amount of white, decent amount of the silver effects, and then obviously you're gonna get, you know, different colors throughout it as you're pouring, right? And so now what we're gonna do is go around, make sure everything's hit and filled up with epoxy. If there's any spots that aren't, we'll just rub our hand in there, get rid of surface tension. It'll fill and level out because it's plenty thick. If you have any spots you don't like we got just a big white drip right there, go around and we'll just fine tune anything that we don't like. See how easy that was to get rid of that? Yeah, just a little. This was a happy little accident that happened. So doing some fracture veins. Usually we'll use a tongue depressor, but this will work. So now I got a really tight fracture vein right along that edge. So typically I do the fracture veins after I spray denatured, or even if you're doing dispersing. We're not going to disperse this with isopropyl. The reason is because once that denatured isopropyl hits those fracture veins, are so small and skinny that they it'll kind of disperse those, even if you're not trying to disperse them. So we'll see what this looks like. Might have to run those again, but just a fine mist denatured alcohol. We don't want to flood the surface. We just want to hit it light, let that evaporate, and then we'll come back and hit it again. So we're getting ready to pull tape. I'll kind of show you what you're looking for, how to check to know when the right time is to pull the tape. So we found out that the front of this slopes a little bit to the front, so this whole front edge is a little thicker than the back. When we're checking, we just fold the tape down. See how slow it's moving? I mean, it's kind of moving fast, but it's super thick right here. And so I always like to not just check one spot and be like, oh, let's pull it, right? So if I come, sorry, James, so right here, right? Moving slow, it's just really, really thick. But if we come back here to another spot, I check it here, it's a lot slower. There's just not as much resin on this back edge. So I always like to check a couple spots. We want to make sure it's moving slow. If we fold the tape down and it just starts to run down super quick, you want to let it set up a little longer. But I always recommend checking a couple spots. So what we're going to do, we know it slopes that way little, and we've had projects like this where counters were built, one spot kind of sloped one way, similar to this scenario. And what we do is we pull the opposite sides first, let those kind of flow there, right? Because if we just went around, pulled everything real quick, the majority of the product's gonna flow to the lowest point. Well, we wanna hold that there, get this front edge flowing first, make sure that's good. We know we have plenty of product there. We'll pull that section last. So real simple, we're gonna pull the tape, wad it up. We're gonna let the resin start to flow over. Try not to, string this out across the floor and get epoxy all over the floor. But notice how it's not pulling any primer. It's because we got a rowdy primer, number one, and the faces were clean. If you sand your faces and they're not clean and then you prime over it, you're gonna have an issue. All right, so now we got it dripping. Now we need to just rub in all the mist spots. Yeah, you want to get rid of the surface tension. So if you don't get rid of that, it'll just constantly keep going down the runs. Yeah, just hold your finger flat and just run it. Try to get it as smooth as you can so it's not lumpy. Now we know this side's all coated. We got plenty of product coming over, so we can go pull that front. All right, so we got all the tape pulled, edges are cut. I mean, look how cool this is turning out. These veins just coming down the faces. It's really cool when you pull the tape, you get to really see how the counter is gonna look. One thing I'll point out is obviously having an exterior part of the counter, we had a little wind, we pulled the tape and you can see how far it kind of strung out from it dripping. And so just kind of keep that in mind if you're doing something, maybe plastic, a larger area. Obviously if it's not windy, you're not gonna have that issue. But never assume once your edges are done and you've got rid of all the surface tension and they're flowing good, never just walk away. It's always good to stick around for a little bit. Like sometimes you'll get spots where there's just like, all it needs is touched up with your finger, and you can do that while it's wet. But if you just walk away and come back the next day, obviously it's gonna be hard, so you're not gonna be able to fix it. So I always like to stick around for a little bit, check the edges, make sure everything's flowing good. Last thing is, if you can stick around long enough to scrape the drips, you obviously don't have to sand the drips before you top coat. And you're doing matte on this, so you're gonna do a matte urethane. And typically when you're coating stuff exterior, I mean, this is gonna be sticky, tacky for the next 6 hours. Probably gonna get some dust, debris in it. The other option would be to tint off an area, right? The part that's sticking outside, or you could do a pop-up tint, plastic offer on the pop-up tint. I mean, there's ways to contain it, to minimize, bugs getting in it, dust, debris, stuff like that. Obviously, coating on a super windy day is not, you know, recommended because you're just constantly going to have stuff blowing in it. But the cool thing about the top coats is we can always sand imperfections before we top coat. So that's it, guys. I think it's about 30-35 square foot top. We did black base, white, silver effects. Stone kit process turned out beautiful. So just get a couple shots for you, and then we'll come back after he top coats, gets everything put together, sink in, and get some final footage.